Hello, and today we're going to be talking about bullet point 4, which is Lenin's Russia. So what you need to know for the exam is that, how and why were the Bolsheviks actually able to hold on to power after their seizure? Well, there's a number of factors. First off, we have the revolution. Trotsky takes over Petrograd in the name of the Soviet, using his position as chairman. He uses the MRC in a pretty much bloodless revolution. And this was really a facade, because it's really the Bolsheviks taking over. They cut all the supplies off, communications off in the city, bringing it to a standstill, enabling them to go and have the revolution. They go into the Winter Palace and they arrest the provisional government. By this point, quite a lot of people hated the provisional government anyway and were reluctant to stand up for it, really. The second thing is Lenin's early decrees that he does. This gives him support. He's able to hold on power because people like what he's done. So Lenin gave the people what they wanted, redistribution of land for the peasants, so the peasants like that, and workers control of factories. Again, so this pleased two huge parts of society. The third thing that he does is the closure of the Constituent Assembly. The Social Revolutionaries win the elections in November 1917, and at the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly, Lenin and the Red Army forcibly close it at gunpoint. This stopped the organisation of other political parties and really forced the civil war. I mean, there was no major uprising about this at the beginning. It was a bit of sort of short disputes over it, but I think what people were thinking was, kind of happy. They've given us land, they've given us control of the factories, and they've done the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the peace, bread and land. We've got what we were promised. Next, obviously I've just mentioned the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. That happens too. The treaty is hugely humiliating for Russia. Vast land and resources are lost. But, they've got to fulfill their deal, the peace, bread and land. They gain support from people who wanted an end to war. They could deal with the economy now. All the sort of war-weary soldiers returned home, so that was good for them, but very humiliating, the peace terms. Then the Civil War happens. The war is a really good opportunity for the Bolsheviks to wipe out all their opposition. So basically, once they've killed everyone, then job done. There'll be no one else to stand in the Bolsheviks' way. They can keep hold on power. There's no alternative there. Next we have war communism. It's basically a policy to assist the Bolsheviks win the civil war and stay in power. The two main points are that they requisition grain by force to feed the workers who are producing the weapons, and also to feed the soldiers who are fighting the civil war, so that's important. And then the second thing is that worker discipline is increased, so you've got fines for lateness and absenteeism, because you need to keep those workers in the factories producing weapons for you so that you can win the civil war. There was also the use of the Cheka and Red Terror. The Cheka were created in 1917 to basically hunt down and torture opponents of the Bolsheviks. So anyone who didn't support the Bolsheviks feared them. They were targeted as a society group rather than on an individual basis, which was even more chilling. A really good example of Red Terror and the Red Army in action is the Kronstadt Rebellion in 1921. The next thing is the change of policy from war communism to the NEP, the new economic policy. After the ravages of war communism, the economy needed a boost. Lenin was quite flexible and sacrificed his principles to stay in power by advocating a more capitalist policy. A lot of people say that this was from the Kronstadt Rebellion, and possibly it is. Lenin certainly got the fear that his most valuable supporters were turning against him. So next on the spec is you need to know what are the salient features of the new Soviet state. Well, firstly, Russia is in a state of decomposition at this point. It's falling to bits, and Lenin needs to make a new government, Sovnarkom. Bolshevik support isn't widespread. They only have control in the cities, Moscow and Petrograd. The Social Revolutionaries, of course, won the elections, so it shows that the Bolsheviks are not the most popular party at this point. And also shows you the centres of control that they had in the cities. There's a militant drive to Bolshevise the population by force, if need be. The state had control of all enterprises and businesses by about 1920 and employed harsh discipline under war communism. We've talked about the fines and that strikes are made illegal. Internal trade is made illegal. There's this barter system that's introduced, and the state takes over distribution and production. Finally, the church and state are separated. Obviously, communism has no room for the church. It's a very czarist thing. Judges are removed and replaced by local Soviet members. Opposition parties are liquidated. Any opposition's got rid of, especially through the Cheka, which is created in 1917 to protect the revolution and eliminate any counter-revolutionaries. But finally, really, it's the use of a police state to suppress all opposition. So the creation of totalitarian regimes, which is one that has absolute power over its people. We're talking about power here, control via propaganda, the creation of the cult of personality, control of technology, transport and communication. This spreads the word, that this brainwashes the people if you have control over these things. It isn't like autocracy where it's one person has complete power. It's control over the whole state, over its people, through these means. Also, what you need to know for the exam is what is the importance of an official ideology? Well, it's important that the Bolsheviks have a clear aim, people understand where they're going to, what they're trying to create, that there's a goal to strive towards, that they can build a utopia in Russia. That sort of thing is very appealing. It also gains support from the working classes, and any people who were against the Bolsheviks or against communism were eliminated. Fear made people cooperate. In terms of the policy itself, the official ideology, well, we're talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat, dictatorship of the working classes. Essentially, the working classes ruling Russia. And really, the features of that are rule through Red Terror, the use of Soviets, repression against any capitalist elements, and the banning of opposition parties and factions. Also, what you need to know is what is the importance of persecution of anti-Bolshevik rivals. Well, I think this is rather obvious, so I'll just skim through. Firstly, the use of torture by the Cheka allows them to gain information to stay one step ahead of the game, stay in power. Knowledge is power, really, so the more you can intimidate people and get information, the better. Death, obviously that gets rid of opposition altogether, helpful. And fear, that makes people cooperate. And this idea of creation of an enemy, a sort of them and us mentality is used, and it's proof that there's an evil that needs to be fought. And finally, what you need to know on bullet point 4 is what is the importance of the dominance of three key institutions: the party, the Red Army and the secret police. Firstly, with the party, membership brings its own perks and benefits, so loyalty to the Bolshevik cause is maintained, members get jobs and homes, and are usually unwilling to sacrifice these benefits for principle's sake. Also, the strong leadership of people like Lenin and Trotsky is maybe what Russia needs, and they gain support through doing things like offering decrees, and so, the party is intrinsic to building this utopia. Secondly, the Red Army, really helpful in killing opposition in the Civil War, puts down things like unrest in the Kronstadt Rebellion of 1921, also responsible for closing the Constituent Assembly. So again, they're just really helpful to have. It's always beneficial to have your own private army. And then lastly, the Cheka. These are interesting because individuals are not persecuted for what they have done, rather who they are. For example, if they're a class enemy like the bourgeoisie or, upper classes. Or what they know. They're persecuted for what they might know. So whole sections of society are targeted rather than an individual. And the Cheka are hated and feared throughout Russia. They're renowned for their torturous methods.